What if the very reason you've never truly fit in was because you were never meant to? What if the discomfort you felt your entire life wasn't a flaw, but a sign of your deeper calling? Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And for those who walk the path of awakening, that journey often begins in isolation, in confusion, in a quiet rebellion against everything that feels false. This speech is for the ones who've always felt different, misunderstood, too deep for shallow conversations, too sensitive for a numb world. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are awakening. Rooted in Jungian psychology, this message will guide you through the sacred truth that you were never here to fit in, you were sent to awaken others. Through pain, shadow, healing, and deep presence, you will discover that your very existence is the catalyst for change. You are the mirror, the trigger, the spark, and the time has come to stop hiding your light. You've been told your whole life that you need to belong somewhere, that you must fit in to be accepted, loved, or even respected. From early on, you're taught to mold yourself into shapes that make other people comfortable. You learn how to quiet your voice so you don't seem too opinionated, how to dress a certain way so you don't attract too much attention, how to agree with things you don't believe in just to avoid confrontation. Slowly, layer by layer, the mask forms, and you wear it so long that eventually even you forget what's underneath. And to some extent, but there comes a moment when the soul begins to rebel, when you can't breathe inside the roles you've been playing. Something within starts to whisper, not loud at first, but persistent. It says, "This isn't who you are." You try to ignore it. You keep playing along, you smile at the right times, you nod, you do what's expected, but inside there's a dissonance. You feel disconnected, like you're standing in a crowd but never truly seen. That's not a coincidence. That's the first sign of awakening. You see, the desire to fit in is a deeply human one, but it's also a deeply conditioned one. It's born out of fear, the fear of being alone, of being abandoned, of being judged. And so we shrink, we soften our edges, we dilute our truth, not because we're weak, but because we've been taught that to belong, we must not stand out. But here's the paradox. The more you try to fit in, the more you lose touch with the very thing that makes you irreplaceable, your uniqueness, your insight, your truth. These are not accidents. They are the exact things the world needs from you. Yet these are often the first things we sacrifice in the name of acceptance. Think about this. Why does fitting in feel so exhausting? Why does it feel like a constant performance? It's because your soul was never designed to conform. It was designed to awaken. And awakening often starts with discomfort. It begins when you realize that the approval you've been chasing isn't satisfying, that the roles you're playing feel hollow, that the conversations you're part of are shallow echoes of deeper truths you long to express. So when you feel like you don't belong, it's not because something is wrong with you. It's because something is finally becoming right. You're waking up to the realization that you weren't sent here to fit into dysfunctional systems, fake relationships, or empty traditions. You were sent here to challenge them with your presence. And that is not an easy task. It takes courage to stand in your truth when everyone around you is trying to shrink you back into the mold. It takes strength to choose authenticity over approval. But it's in that choice that you begin to live. You will be misunderstood. You will be called difficult, too intense, too sensitive, too quiet, too loud, too different. But all of that is noise. All of that is projection. What they see as too much is often just a mirror reflecting what they've buried within themselves. And yes, it will hurt. Rejection always does. But that pain isn't a dead end. It's a threshold. It's the place where you meet yourself again, fully, honestly, without pretense. And in that meeting, you'll realize something profound. You were never meant to fit in because you're not here to maintain the status quo. You're here to shake it, to question what's been accepted blindly, to illuminate what's been ignored, to to bring depth where there's been surface. Your very being is an interruption to the sleepwalking of the world. That's not something to apologize for, that's something to honor. There will be times when the path feels lonely, when you look around and wonder if maybe you made a mistake, if maybe it would be easier to just go back, to blend in, to stop questioning, to stop caring so deeply. But you can't unknow what you've seen. You can't unfeel the truth. And that's the point. Once you begin to awaken, there is no going back. The discomfort of fitting in becomes unbearable, the silence becomes too loud, the pretending becomes too heavy. So instead of asking, "Why don't I fit in?" begin asking, "What part of me is trying to wake up?" That shift in perspective changes everything. Suddenly, your struggle isn't a burden, it's a signal, a compass pointing you toward your purpose. And that purpose isn't to blend in with the crowd, it's to be the spark that reminds others of their own light. You're not broken because you don't fit in. You're awake, and the world needs more people like you, people who are willing to feel deeply, to speak truthfully, to walk authentically even when it's uncomfortable, because when you do, you give others permission to do the same. And that's how awakening spreads, not by force, but by example. You weren't born to fit into this world. You were born to awaken it. There is something powerful buried inside the experience of being misunderstood. It's easy to dismiss it as a flaw, something to fix or avoid. But what if it's not? What if feeling out of place isn't a mistake, but a message? So many people spend their lives trying to avoid that feeling, thinking that the discomfort means they're doing something wrong. But the truth is, that ache, that subtle sense of misalignment, is one of the first signs that you're waking up. You begin to notice things others ignore. You start to question the very things you once accepted without hesitation. The conversations that used to entertain you now feel empty. The roles you once played effortlessly now feel like a betrayal of your soul. You may find yourself withdrawing, becoming more quiet in spaces that used to feel familiar. You're not being distant, you're being reborn. And that rebirth is rarely gentle. It shakes the very foundation of who you thought you were, because the old identity no longer fits the deeper truth that's rising to the surface. When you're misunderstood, it's tempting to try to explain yourself, to prove to others that your heart is in the right place, that your intentions are pure, that you're not as strange or difficult or intense as they think. But the deeper you go into your awakening, the more you realize you don't need to be understood by everyone. In fact, trying to be understood by people who are not ready to meet you where you are will only dim your light. You'll twist yourself into shapes to be more palatable, more relatable, more acceptable. And in doing so, you'll abandon the very essence of what makes you valuable. That essence, that raw truth, that inner knowing, it is not something everyone will immediately recognize. And that's okay, because you're not here to be recognized. You're here to remind, to awaken, to embody something that speaks directly to the soul, not just to the intellect. Your energy alone may trigger those who are still deeply asleep in their roles. It's not your job to make them comfortable. It's your calling to be a catalyst. Feeling like an outsider is often a rite of passage for those who carry deep insight. That aching sense of separation from the world isn't a punishment, it's a preparation. It's the soul withdrawing from shallow frequencies so it can reattune to its higher calling. You're not being left out. You're being called inward, called into your truth, called into your strength, called into the voice you were always meant to share. You begin to realize that the world isn't rejecting you, it simply doesn't recognize what you carry. And that's not because it lacks value, it's because what you carry is new, it's disruptive, it's unfamiliar. Most people are so deeply identified with their masks that anyone living outside of that system is automatically seen as a threat. not intentionally, not with malice, but subconsciously, deeply, because your authenticity touches the places in them that they've learned to bury. So yes, they may call you distant, cold, overly emotional, too intense, unrealistic, but beneath all of that judgment is fear, fear of their own forgotten truth, fear of the unknown, fear of what might unravel if they were to stop pretending. And when you truly understand that, you stop taking things personally. You no longer see being misunderstood as a curse, you see it as confirmation. Because the moment you start to awaken, the world around you won't know how to respond. It's like changing your frequency in a room full of static. It causes interference. But that interference is not chaos. It's recalibration. It's the beginning of resonance. And the more you hold your truth, the more you begin to attract others who are also tuning in. You'll start to feel less alone, not because the world changed, but because you stopped pretending. There will always be people who don't understand your journey. But you weren't assigned your path for them to understand. You were assigned it because you have the capacity to walk it, to carry the weight of being different, to transmute that weight into wisdom, and then to use that wisdom to guide others who are quietly waiting for someone to show them a different way. You're not here to fit into familiar patterns. You're here to break them. You're here to be the living question in a world obsessed with answers. And questions disturb people. Questions make people uncomfortable. But discomfort is the first step toward growth. It cracks the shell of certainty and makes room for something deeper to enter. So when you feel like no one gets you, when your voice shakes from holding back all the truth you want to share, when you wonder if maybe you're the one who's broken, pause, take a breath, and remember this: the very reason you feel this way is because something ancient in you is stirring. Something sacred, something that cannot be molded, silenced, or hidden. You're not meant to fit in because you're not meant to sleepwalk through life. You are the alarm, the echo of forgotten truths, the reminder that there's more, so much more, beneath the surface. And by daring to stand in your difference, you awaken others to theirs. Pain is one of life's most misunderstood teachers. Most people try to escape it, numb it, or pretend it never happened. But if you're awakening, you already know. It doesn't go away by ignoring it. In fact, the more you avoid it, the louder it becomes. Because pain doesn't show up to punish you. It shows up to reveal you. It carries messages from the deepest parts of your soul, parts you've hidden, suppressed, or forgotten. And within that pain, there's power waiting to be claimed. Think about the moments in your life that hurt the most. Not the surface-level discomfort, but the gut-wrenching, soul-deep pain that left you questioning everything. Your identity, your worth, your purpose. At the time, it probably felt like everything was falling apart. And maybe it was. But not because you were being destroyed, because you were being stripped of illusions. The pain wasn't the end. It was the beginning of seeing clearly. When the illusions break, when the false stories collapse, what's left is raw truth. And that truth is often uncomfortable, because it forces you to look at what you've been avoiding. It forces you to sit with parts of yourself you thought you had to hide. Your grief, your rage, your shame, your fear. But here's the thing. These emotions aren't your enemies. They're not signs that something's wrong with you. They are sacred messengers. And they come bearing gifts. You learn things in pain that joy will never teach you. You learn how to stand in your truth when everything around you is falling away. You learn the strength of your spirit when your body and mind feel too weak to continue. You learn what matters, not because someone told you, but because you lost everything that didn't. And in that silence, that aching stillness, something ancient within you begins to rise. It's in the darkness that your soul begins to glow, not because the pain is beautiful, but because your ability to stay present in it is. That's where transformation lives, not in bypassing the shadow, but in walking through it fully awake. The wound becomes the womb. The place where everything collapses becomes the birthplace of your new self. And that's the paradox. The very pain that once broke you now becomes the foundation of your strength. It humbles you, yes, but it also deepens you. It teaches you empathy. It softens your judgments. You stop looking at other people's masks with envy, and you begin to see their wounds instead. You recognize their silent suffering, and because you've been there, because you've held your own pain without running, you now carry the capacity to hold space for others. That's the real alchemy. Not turning pain into something else, but letting it open you, letting it stretch you, letting it reveal the parts of you that are indestructible. The world doesn't need more people pretending to be perfect. It needs more people who have met their darkness and come back with light. People who have been shattered and rebuilt, not into their old self, but into someone more honest, more grounded, more whole. There is wisdom in your scars, not the kind you read in books, but the kind you bleed for, the kind that only comes from lived experience. And that wisdom is not just for you. That's what makes this path sacred. You walk through the fire not only to heal yourself, but to become a guide for others. Not by preaching, not by fixing, but simply by being someone who has walked that path and made it out the other side. Someone who can look into the eyes of another in pain and say, "I see you. I've been there, and you're going to make it through." You become a mirror, not of perfection, but of possibility. You show others that it's okay to fall apart, because sometimes that's exactly what's needed. You remind them that their pain isn't shameful. It's part of their becoming, and in a world that's constantly telling people to stay strong, to keep it together, to put on a happy face, you become the quiet presence that says, "You don't have to hide here. Your truth is welcome." So when you look back on your journey and see all the moments that hurt the most, realize this: those weren't detours. They were initiations. You were never being punished. You were being prepared. The depth of your pain was matched by the depth of your purpose. And it's through that pain that your gift was born. That's why you're not meant to fit in. Because you carry a different frequency now, one shaped by truth, not by illusion, one grounded in presence, not performance. You've walked through the fire, you've met your shadow, and instead of running, you listened. That's how you become someone who awakens others, not through perfection, but through presence, not through answers, but through honesty, not because you've never known pain, but because you've made peace with it. There comes a time in your awakening when you start to notice something strange. Your presence alone begins to change the energy in a room. You're not doing anything dramatic. You're not trying to provoke or correct or even speak up. You simply walk in, and suddenly things feel different. People fidget more. Some avoid eye contact. Others become defensive without reason. It's subtle, but it's undeniable, and you start to wonder, why does my presence seem to unsettle people? The truth is, you've become a mirror, and not the kind that flatters or filters. You've become the kind of mirror that reflects people back to themselves in ways they're not ready to face. Your authenticity disrupts the scripts others have grown used to playing. Your stillness exposes their noise. Your truth highlights their avoidance. You're not doing it on purpose, but it happens all the same. Because when you no longer participate in the collective performance, you automatically reveal it for what it is. Most people don't even realize how deeply attached they are to their roles, their personas, their carefully curated identities. They've spent years, sometimes their whole lives, learning how to hide behind masks that made them feel accepted. So when someone walks in who isn't wearing one, it creates discomfort, because it raises the unspoken question, what if I don't need mine either? But most aren't ready to ask that yet, and so instead they reject the mirror, they project, they label, they distance themselves, not because of who you are, but because of what you reflect. You might start to hear things like, "There's something about you I can't figure out," or "You make people uncomfortable," or "You think you're better than others." But none of those statements are really about you. They're about the effect your energy has on those who are not yet ready to see themselves. It's not personal, it's energetic, and that shift can feel isolating at first. You might feel tempted to shrink, to soften your light just enough to not trigger anyone, to dull your voice, your fire, your clarity, so that you can stay in the comfort of belonging. But here's the truth. If you have to become less of yourself to be accepted, the acceptance is counterfeit. It's not you they're accepting, it's the version of you that makes them comfortable. And that version might fit in, but it will never feel alive. When you realize this, something powerful happens. You stop needing to be understood. You stop waiting for approval. You stop chasing connection at the cost of your truth. And instead you begin to trust the quiet power of your presence, not as a weapon, not as a performance, but as a beacon. You realize that you don't have to convince anyone to wake up. You only have to embody what awakening looks like. It's in that embodiment that your real power is felt, not in what you say, but in who you are. Not in arguments or explanations, but in energy. Your very being becomes a reminder that there is another way to live. That truth exists beyond performance. That peace exists beyond striving. That depth exists beyond appearances. You carry that frequency now, not because you studied it, but because you've lived it. You've earned it. You've walked through the fire and come out the other side with eyes that see through illusion. And people feel that, even if they don't understand it. Some will be drawn to it without knowing why. Others will run from it without knowing what they're fleeing. But all of it is part of the awakening you've been called into. You're not here to fit into the existing systems. You're here to be the quiet question that makes those systems tremble. You're here to be the still presence in the storm, the calm gaze that says, "You don't have to keep pretending." Of course, it's not easy. It takes a strong heart to stand in that space, to be a living mirror and not internalize the discomfort you cause, to witness people turning away from you and know that their turning isn't rejection but resistance, and to remain steady through it all. Not because you're unaffected, but because you're anchored. You found a truth inside you that's deeper than their misunderstanding, a peace that isn't dependent on being liked or praised or understood. And this is what begins to awaken others, not your explanations, but your example, not your words, but your way of being. People will watch you and feel something stir within themselves. They won't know what it is at first, but it will stay with them. It will echo, and one day when they're ready, it might just be the spark that starts their own journey inward. So no, you're not here to be liked by everyone. You're not here to be easily understood. You're here to disturb the slumbering, not by shaking them, but simply by being awake in their presence. You're not here to dim your light. You're here to shine so honestly that it reveals everything false in its glow. Loneliness is one of the most misunderstood parts of awakening. At first, it doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like loss, like silence pressing against your chest, like watching everything familiar drift away while you stand still, no longer sure where you belong. You find yourself disconnected from the world you once knew. The conversations that used to interest you now feel empty. The spaces you once entered with ease now feel heavy. You might even look around and wonder, where did everyone go? But the truth is, they didn't leave. You rose. This kind of solitude isn't the same as isolation. It's not about being physically alone, though that often happens too. It's something deeper. It's a spiritual quieting, a shedding, a sacred withdrawal from the noise of the external world, so you can finally hear what's been trying to speak inside you. And that inner voice, the one that gets drowned out by constant distraction, begins to get loud, not in volume, but in clarity. And for the first time in a long time, you're not running from it. You start to realize that being alone with yourself isn't something to fear, it's something to revere. Because in that silence you begin to feel, not just surface emotions, but the deep-rooted truths you've buried for years. The unresolved grief, the unspoken desires, the suppressed intuition. It all begins to surface, not to overwhelm you, but to invite you. This is the space where your real self begins to emerge, not the version you created for others, but the one you were always meant to be before the world told you otherwise. At first, it feels uncomfortable. It might feel like you're being pulled into a void, but that void is sacred ground. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And like all transformations, it requires surrender. It requires trust. Trust that you're not being punished. Trust that the solitude is part of the design. Trust that something beautiful is unfolding, even if you can't yet see it. This is the path of the initiate. Every soul who awakens must walk it, not because it's glamorous or romantic, but because the noise must fall away before the truth can rise. You can't carry old energies into new dimensions. You can't awaken and cling to everything you used to lean on for comfort. That version of life wasn't built to hold your expanded self, so it has to dissolve. And in that dissolution, there is grief, there is uncertainty, but there is also clarity. The longer you walk this path, the more you begin to see that your loneliness was never empty. It was fertile. Every step you take alone becomes a conversation with your higher self. Every moment of silence becomes a deeper knowing. You begin to feel things more vividly. The sky, the wind, the texture of a moment. You become present, and in that presence you remember who you are, not who the world wanted you to be. There will come a time when you no longer see this loneliness as something to endure, but something to embrace. You'll start to see it as a sacred cocoon, a space where your wings are being formed, because it's in the stillness that you grow, not outwardly, but inwardly, and that inner expansion changes everything. You no longer seek people just to fill the void, you start to seek resonance, depth, authenticity. And because of that, the people who are meant for you will begin to appear, not in the chaos, but in the calm. But until then, let your solitude be your sanctuary. Let it teach you how to stand on your own without needing applause, permission, or validation. Let it reveal the parts of you that are truly yours, not borrowed, not expected, not performed. Because when you emerge from this season, you'll carry something different. You'll no longer be a seeker, you'll be a source. You'll no longer follow the crowd, you lead by presence, alone. And that's when everything shifts. That's when your solitude becomes a strength. People will sense it. They'll feel the stillness in your energy. They'll trust you without knowing why, not because you say the right things, but because you've become rooted. And in a world spinning with confusion, someone who is rooted is magnetic. They offer something rare: stillness, truth, clarity. They offer themselves. So if you're in that place now, where you feel like you're walking alone, know this: you're not lost. You're being initiated. You're being prepared to hold space for others who haven't yet made it through. And the solitude you now sit in will one day become the light you offer them. You will know how to guide, not because you memorized the way, but because you walked it, step by sacred step. You were never meant to fit in with the noise, you were meant to rise in the silence. There's a moment in every awakening where the focus begins to shift. At first, everything is about survival, about healing, about trying to find your footing after everything you once believed started to collapse. You begin by trying to understand your pain, your patterns, your past. You look inward, peeling away each layer with careful, sometimes painful honesty. You cry, you break, you grow, and it's necessary. That journey inward is sacred. It reconnects you with the truth of who you are beneath all the conditioning. But at some point, something changes. You realize you're no longer just surviving. You're no longer simply trying to fix or protect yourself. The healing that once consumed you starts to give way to something deeper, something quieter, but more profound. The question becomes less about how do I fix myself, and more about how can I serve others from this space of truth. Without even trying, you begin to notice others more. You hear their pain in a way you couldn't before. You feel their heaviness not as a weight to carry, but as something deeply familiar, and not because you still carry it, but because you once did. You stop seeing people's masks as annoying. You begin to understand why they wear them. You stop judging people's reactions, their wounds, their projections, and instead you see the child behind their behavior, the one who was hurt, the one who wasn't heard, the one who never felt safe enough to be real. That compassion doesn't come from some idea or philosophy. It comes from having walked through your own fire and survive. You've met your ego, you've unraveled its defenses, and you've watched how much of your identity was shaped by fear. So when you see others doing the same things you once did, hiding, pretending, performing, you don't react. You hold space. That's the beginning of your transition, from seeker to guide. Not because you now have all the answers, not because you're finished. No one ever really finishes, but because you've learned how to stay awake while being human. You've learned how to breathe through discomfort, how to sit with someone's pain without needing to solve it, how to love people without needing to change them. You become a mirror, but this time a gentler one, not one that shatters illusions with force, but one that reflects truth with presence. This doesn't mean you start preaching. Awakening is never loud. It's not about convincing people of what you've learned. It's about embodying it. You stop needing attention or recognition. The spiritual ego fades away. The need to be seen as special dissolves. You don't want to stand on a pedestal. You want to sit beside others and remind them that they are already whole. Because you remember what it felt like to forget that, and you know how powerful it is to be gently reminded. It's in this space that humility becomes your natural state. Not forced, not performative, but real. You no longer need to be right. You no longer argue to prove a point. You don't need people to agree with your truth. You simply live it. And in doing so, you give others permission to live theirs. That's what makes your presence so powerful. It doesn't impose, it invites. As you walk this path, you'll begin to see that the world isn't divided into awake and asleep, conscious and unconscious. It's all one great unfolding, one grand remembering, and everyone is on their own timeline. You won't try to rush anyone anymore. You won't try to drag people where they're not ready to go. You'll understand the value of timing, the importance of grace. You'll learn how to hold light and shadow together without needing to force resolution. You'll also begin to notice that your own healing deepens as you serve others, not through sacrifice or self-abandonment, but through presence. The more you offer space for others to awaken, the more anchored you become in your own truth. You don't guide from a place of needing to be needed. You guide because it's natural. It's what you've been prepared for through every wound, every dark night, every breakdown that brought you closer to yourself. You've stopped chasing the applause. You no longer need your story to be understood by everyone. You realize now that the point was never to be admired, it was to be aligned. You've stepped out of the spotlight and into your soul. And from that place, everything changes. You speak less, but your words carry weight. You do less, but your presence creates ripple effects. You shine not to be seen, but so others can remember that they can shine too. And that's what this is about, not self-improvement, not spiritual perfection, but presence, realness, heart. It's about becoming so deeply rooted in who you truly are that your existence alone becomes a source of calm in a chaotic world. You've moved beyond trying to be impressive. Now you want to be honest, you want to be free, and you want others to know that they can be too. Because you've seen what's possible when someone stops performing and starts living. And once you've touched that depth within yourself, there's no greater joy than helping someone else do the same. You didn't go through all that pain just to survive. You went through it to become a light for others still finding their way. There is something you need to understand about this path. It's not just about you. It starts with you, yes. The awakening begins within. You feel the friction, the pain, the disconnection, and you begin to question everything. You start looking deeper, peeling back the layers, discovering who you truly are beneath the masks. But once that light is lit within you, it doesn't stop with you. It spreads quietly, powerfully, and it touches everything you come into contact with. That's the ripple. That's the truth behind all of this. You're not here to simply awaken for your own sake. You're here because your courage has the power to awaken generations. It might seem hard to believe, especially if you're still walking through the remnants of loneliness, still carrying the weight of feeling different, still navigating the discomfort of no longer belonging to the old version of your life. But that very disconnection, that very contrast between who you were and who you're becoming, is what creates the impact. It's not the words you say, it's the energy you carry. The way you walk into a room, the way you hold your silence, the way you choose truth over comfort. It all sends a message, even if no one speaks it out loud. You see, most people are sleepwalking, not because they want to be, but because it's safer that way. The world taught them that it's easier to conform than to question, easier to cope than to change, easier to numb than to feel. But then you come along. You with your quiet refusal to participate in the performance. You who chooses stillness when everyone else is rushing. You who listens deeply when others are desperate to be heard, without trying, without forcing anything. Your presence disrupts the illusion. You create a subtle but undeniable shift in the atmosphere, and the people around you feel it. Some will be drawn to it immediately. They'll feel safe with you even if they can't explain why. Others may be triggered by it, even resist it at first, because your presence stirs something in them they've been trying to bury. But that's not your responsibility to manage. You're not here to make everyone comfortable. You're here to be real, to be light. And light doesn't negotiate with darkness, it simply shines. What you might not realize is how far those ripples go. A conversation you have today, a small act of kindness, a moment of deep honesty. It doesn't end with the person in front of you, it travels. It sits in someone's memory, resurfaces years later, shifts a decision, inspires a change. You may never see the full effect of the energy you carry, but it's there, it lives on. Because once light touches something, it's never the same again. Because once light touches something, it's never the same again. And this isn't just about people in your immediate world. This is about the generations you'll never meet. Your healing now, your awakening, your courage to break old patterns. It rewrites more than just your own story. It clears the path for those who come after you. Maybe you come from a lineage where silence was survival, where emotions were buried, where truth was punished, and yet here you are, feeling, speaking, remembering. That alone is revolutionary. That alone is sacred. The work you do on yourself ripples backward and forward. It heals the parts of your lineage that never had the tools or the voice, and it shapes a new possibility for those who will